All right, we're live. Everyone pretend there was a big fancy intro. I had one, Peter. I had a great one, and you have to bring it into stream. Anyway, I couldn't figure it out. We have no intro. So thank you, everyone, for coming and spending Thursday night with us.
Hi, Dave fans. Hi, Eric fans.
Yes, I'm very, very excited about this one. I talked to our guest tonight. Geez, it had to have been about a year ago, I think, trying to get him on to do a tutorial and show what he knows. He is one of the greatest colorists and longest running colorists in the business. He's been using Photoshop since 94. Is that right?
Yeah, when I came in 94, we were on a Photoshop 2.5 beta. They didn't even have we were testing Photoshop 2.5. It was fun.
Yeah, right. You know, this is right at the beginning when people were just starting to use the computer to color. And since then, he's been innovating for years and years and developing more and more advanced techniques as the program evolves. And so we are very, very lucky and fortunate to have Peter Steigerwald of Aspen Comics. Thank you so much for coming on, Peter.
You're welcome. As a note for all the people who may be looking at their current Photoshop and mine, Photoshop has evolved. I have stayed in 2013 or so. This version worked for me, so I kept it. But yeah, there's much fancier stuff out there with blacker screens and windows. But the basics are all still there. We're going to talk about more of the mechanics and the artistry of colors rather than the fancy stuff Photoshop can do.
So for what you do, you don't need any of that, because I know that they've got some 3D tools and some crazy things, but
I'm absolutely sure that once I get one, I could figure out the ways to use it. But a lot of what I do for, just straight up coloring is based on a lot of the things that you guys have talked about in painting. It's artistry stuff that has not a lot to do with fancy tools and, gadgety stuff. So many of those things are very helpful for creating illustrations and do other things, but I developed workarounds for a lot of those things that weren't in the program originally. I developed workarounds years and years and years ago. Mm-hmm. So I continue to have those. And even though the program has it now for other people and probably are much faster, I've used to my way to do it.
Well, and before we move on, I want to introduce our co-host, Eric Grove. Thank you so much, Eric, for coming on again. We have it easy tonight, Eric, because we won't be drawing.
Yeah, it's gonna be a stress-free one here.
Yeah, I've got coffee. I'm just gonna relax. So
I was gonna say maybe we can make Eric draw, but that's fine.
Yeah, Dave really enjoys making me sweat. So
yes,
yeah.
I really do. We've got some good sweat streams coming up soon. We're gonna do some painting. We've got more coming, but for tonight, we're just gonna be able to sit back and watch Peter color.
No, yeah, this is it's a piece. It's Grace from SoulFire. It's part of our. It's a piece that you did to help promote our SoulFire Kickstarter campaign, which is live now. So this will be our first plug. I'm sure we'll have multiple more in the.
We certainly will.
Show, but
yeah, we've got it pinned at the top of the chat.
Okay, so then I don't have to mention the link. There we go.
Well, don't mention it because if it's just pinned there, people will forget. But at the top of the chat, there is a link for. Aspen Studios, SoulFire, the core, and it's also in the description. And
yes, I'm looking at the YouTube feed right now. There we go. I see it.
Yeah, we'll be talking about it more as we go along.
And I hear your Kickstarter did excellently well, so congratulations on that. On the Monday Night Draw Book 1.
Yeah, it did so much better than I could have possibly hoped, and it's really all thanks to you guys that are watching, and I'm eternally grateful. It would have been worth doing if nobody bought it. It's just nice to have a book of all the stuff that we did, but I'm so grateful that it did so well.
Simpsons is doing like 40 seasons. You got a long time to go to catch up.
And Family Guy is what? I don't know. How many seasons is Family Guy? I'm going through that show twice now. Like I've already watched the entire. I sit down and watch a couple of episodes a night. I'm halfway through again.
So, actually, let me get the video started because we can talk while we're going.
Okay.
Basically, what I did was, because the show's roughly an hour and a half to 2 hours, It took much longer to color this. So I recorded everything. We'll go through all the steps. Anybody who's got any questions, we can go back and review stuff and, be as in depth, and I'll answer all the questions you guys have, but I'll run it at about 1 3/4 speed and whip through the parts that get kind of boring.
Yes. And I will do my best to make sure to get your questions as you ask them in the chat. I see one Mighty R is here. Vincent is here. We have Henry Jeremick here. Basically, the crew is here tonight, so it's great to see all you guys.
So great. This is the wonderfully beautiful black and white drawing from David. I get it flatted. Flats don't. When the flatter comes in, it doesn't really matter what color they do. So then I bring it in, and part of my thought process, there is some time that you're not seeing here, which is me staring at it, figuring what I'm going to do. That's like an hour. But now I'm starting to just separate out, make sure the proper character sections, costume sections, things like that. And this happens not just for Grace. This is for Superman, for Batman, for anybody. Make sure that I catch all the little doohickeys and we see those sections, and it helps me plan what I'm going to do. Basically, I'm laying in some general base colors. I usually start dark to light. And because there's many ways that you can build things in Photoshop, because it's not like it's a physical medium. So you can build it watercolor style, which is light to dark. You can build it acrylics, which is dark to light. You can build it, oil, which is any way you want. But you can see I'm just kind of filling in things, checking, making sure that all the selections are set up, and just generally planning my color scheme. So
now, Peter, you have somebody else that does the flats?
Yeah, I do send out for that, because it's something that, when I first started doing the job, that's one of the things that I did was I flatted for other people, as in the production department at Top Cow, which is where we both got our start. But now it's something that it's tedious. It's somewhat time consuming, but it's easier to just send it out to someone else, have them do it, and then bring it back in and then adjust what they do for my level of things. That way I can be actually coloring, doing the artistry stuff that that I'm known for, while someone else is doing the setup work. It's just, it's an assistant type job.
Yeah.
So Peter, you mentioned choosing your color palette, and how do you go about choosing that? Do you have an idea before you start coloring? Is it like based on a script? Do you kind of change it as you go along? What is your thought process when you choose the colors that you use in a piece?
Page creation and covers are two really different theories, but I guess they kind of boil down to the same thing: is what kind of mood am I trying to create for for the piece? In this case, this is about gloriousness. So I'm thinking in my head, how am I going to make this super awesome? All we're saying right now is, I'll actually speed this up a little bit. I just noticed some like doohickey leftovers. I know, Dave, you had cleaned this up before, but there were just some pencil dirt and stuff. And
I told Peter just before we started, I said I cleaned it, but I use a mouse, so it is what it is. Story by Osmosis.
There, and honestly, the printed page, it may not show up, but a long time ago started getting really anal about these things. So I started just like, I'll fix it. You should see how long it takes me to prep one of Arthur Adams' covers, because if this pen is drying up, I gotta really fix this one line, and I'm like, no one would notice, but I spend hours just fixing the line art before I even get started.
Well,
there's some pencil dirt and doohickeys, if you can see my mouse moving around, like right around there. So I'm cleaning up most of that. Here was where for whatever reason, my cursor wasn't working, so I kept redoing stuff. But
So Peter, a Story by Osmosis has a question. He says, do you like to block out the character sections with vector or masks, or just raster and lock the alpha?
No, none of them, because these are based on physical drawings in a scan. They're all entirely raster. There are, when we're getting digitally drawn stuff, possibly you get vector files, but most of the time, by the time it comes to me, it's rastered. It's pixels. It's laid down. We're not doing anything, with flexible point lines and curves that we can adjust. It's set, because it's however the penciler, inker, artist before me has determined that this is what they wanted to look like. They sent me their best effort, and now I'm turning in my best effort on underneath or on top of them, however you want to think about it. But post their work. That it's up to them to define what they want done rather than for me to create it. For myself, I kind of work with the same process because I, like Dave, grew up drawing on a piece of paper. So it's done and it's set. Even when I'm drawing my own pieces, I've finished the pencil drawing, scanned it in, and then, then start coloring. So
Peter, I have a question. You're moving the mouse around it and it's cleaning it up, but it's not erasing anything. And I don't understand. So I'm just going to say, when I do this, I'm all on one layer and I have white selected and I'm just trying to carefully erase things without erasing my line work. So what are you doing?
This is the dodge and burn tool. I keep wanting to point to the screen and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm on a video camera. This is how old I am. But no, it's just dodge and burn. Basically, these are old, photography tools that have been turned into Photoshop. So if you've ever played with it, which I guess you haven't, the dodge tool allows you to, if you just dodge the highlights, will then brighten up the white areas, but leave the black areas alone. Now, if you keep doing hundreds of passes over, you eventually lighten up the dark areas, but the burn tool will darken the dark areas, leave the white areas alone. So when it comes to, like, I'm prepping your inked line art, so it's really not that finessey of a deal. But when I'm prepping penciled line art, like either just someone who's going straight from pencils to inks, and I really have to clean up, like there's a smudgy area because their fist was on the page or something like that, or I'm doing a grayscale, like when I've done Alex Ross sketches or other people's stuff where you're really fine-tuning what they put down on the paper to get the best version of their artwork across in black and white before I even start. There's a lot of just light touches. Mm-hmm. So I'll set it at a very low setting and just do little itty passes. Sometimes it's just tap, 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 rather than big sweeps because, every pass you put down takes a little bit off. So it's sort of like scraping away at marble. You don't want to just hacksaw at that thing with a jackhammer. You want to just take little bits with the chisel, and eventually, reveal what you want. So sometimes cleaning these up, if I was being finessey about it, it's just lots of little taps. Every time you see the little red dot means I'm tapping. It's not necessarily what I'm doing once I continue the stroke, because when I'm continuing the stroke, I may be varying the pressure in my pass, but at least you can see where it starts. If you see a lot of rapid little progressions, especially when I'm, dodging and burning, that just means I'm just doing like, okay, I'm just lightly fixing something.
So hopefully that answers your question too, because we had the same question. And Artsy Designs wants to know, Peter, how do you get the lines of perfect black and white? What settings do you use?
This is actually it's a variable because a lot of it depends on what paper the artist was using, what ink was laid down, how thick the ink is. Like if it was diluted and it's running dry, or a Pigment pen's running just a little bit and it's thin, it can be lighter. So you might have to threshold some areas. If you saw in the beginning, right when I was working underneath, I was selecting this one area. Well, I was doing a test to see what level I would have to. Let me see if I can get back there. I'm selecting this area right now, and I'm going to see what level right there. I'm thresholding. Basically, thresholding just turns into black and white pixels only. It removes all grayscale, which is why I kind of have to prep it ahead of time to make sure that the darks that I want to save are dark enough and the lights are light enough to, and the whatever pencil dirt was in there is not dark enough to become a line, and whatever dark lines might be grayish are dark enough that they stay in there. Wow. So, and then I just threshold it at different levels. So, I may do it in sections, which I've done on multiple artists. I'll just threshold little bits as it goes. But for Dave's, it was, like you said, for the most part, cleaned. It just needed to be adjusted in some areas. So as you see, I go through this and then I just threshold, other than that little bottom half section, I just threshold the rest at one level. And that level depends on who the artist is and what their art actually looks like. I mean, because a lot of my job is making sure that whoever came before me looks the best that they do. So I have different prepping procedures for different artists based on how they work.
Well, and some artists work with like a tonal kind of they'll use like an ink wash, and so you can't do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and Mark Roslin, who does a lot of what we call, it's called digital inking, but really it's not the same skill as an inker. What we're doing is finitely darkening it up, but until we come up with a better term for it, because prepper just sounds like we're, getting ready for the apocalypse.
Browse has a question, and thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Here's a question from Poland. I got your email, by the way, and I'm going to respond. Do you leave color holds on your inks for last, or does it depend on the piece? Thanks for the great content.
We will actually do this right now. Okay, for real quick, what I'm doing here with hair is experimenting, because hair is its own thing. Sometimes, when artists are just drawing stuff in, not always thought for where there's a proper hole in the hair or things like that. So I kind of just put these in and I'm like, that doesn't really work. And honestly, this worked best as one big chunk, because just the way Dave had his lines on this particular drawing. Sometimes it looks good for there to be a gap, sometimes not. But in this case, there wasn't. And we're going to get to line art set up right now. Okay, so what I do now is I create another layer that's grouped with my line art layer. Because if you saw my line art layer before, it's basically, let me go back and show you. Everything's thrown into an alpha channel first, that I can load it as a selection. Let me finish this. Let me find the right spot. Should be right after this. We kind of breezed through it while I was talking, but
so Eric,
I'm deleting the line art here, and what's going to happen is, because I'm deleting the old line art, so I'm loading it as a channel, and you can see that, and then I'm filling that with black, so it's basically a transparent behind the layer. It's not a multiplied layer. It's everything that's not black is not there on the file. It's a layer that's fully transparent, and you can see by this lockdown here that's transparency is locked, so I can't do any addition to it. Basically, I'm leaving the line art as the penciler created it entirely alone. Anything adjusted to it is in adjustment layers or other things. That's not necessarily something you have to do at home. This is a functionality of having editors and artists and other people who want to come back and possibly make notes later on. This allows me the best chance to be flexible with anything that they may have, either comments, good or bad, one way or the other. So a lot of the multi-layering facets that I have are based around, just possible things that I may have to change later. The older I get and the more I know the artists that I'm working with, generally the less notes come in because I know what they're looking for. But as far as the line art questions, here we go. So I create a layer that's green. It has nothing to do with the actual color, what it's going to be in the end. This is just about me making easy to see selections. And I create a layer mask because some of these selections for color knockouts may get complicated. So I accidentally clicked out of Photoshop and then get back in here. And now I'm just going around and I know I'm going to knock out all the lines on her hair. So now I'm just creating one selection for her hair. It's actually, because it's bound as a clipping layer to the line art, as you can see, it only colors the area which is black, which is the solid areas on the line art layer below it, and doesn't touch any of the empty clear layers. It's just a way to isolate it.
K-Pack has a question.
Layers, we can go back on that later, but what's up?
K-Pack has a super chat. Thank you so much, K-Pack. And he says, do you have online tutorials? I'm struggling to color my line art without going over line art with channels in transparency. How long does it take you to color?
This one took about, I think we timed it just under 4 hours, but that's not with thinking time and breaks to examine that I didn't record. I'm not going to record I'm thinking about this. Did this color combo really, really work out? I'm not going to record that for you guys because that's just a blank. That's just a screen of me looking at it. Generally, on a thing like this where it's just a single figure in a background, it took about 4 hours. Pages and complicated covers like some of Dave's with when we did these Avengers covers or other things where there's like 20 characters. Yeah, dude, those will take 20 hours, 40 hours. I mean, it's like, it takes as long as it takes. But Dave and I have been working together for a long time, but I know what he likes to see in his rendering. And I know what his figures require. So there's a little bit of shorthanding and that's what shortens it up. But that's just speed through confidence of relationship and, repeated tasks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so here, this is just more line art knockouts. I started using the pencil tool to do this, even though I could do it with the lasso, but that's because my computer was lagging while I was recording it. And honestly, the pencil tool was smoother than doing the lasso. So there's nothing really packed full here, so I'll just kind of speed through this because we'll get to the end of it. Because after this, once I establish what it basically is, this is all just set up. Everything is just defining everything. So, you know, I'm just knowing what I'm going to knock out later. I know the wings are going to be knocked out. This is just part of the process of Grace being one of our characters. I know how I color Grace. You know, it does adjust a little bit with individual artists, but I know certain areas work best knocked out. Wings always knocked out, hair is always knocked out. So I'm just setting these things up ahead for when we're rendering, and you'll see that only, you know, we'll get back to what happens with those.
Right. Krieger Art asks what DPI you're working at. He says it looks very pixelated. That might be a result of the screen.
Yeah. It's a screen resolution, and it's the fact that I'm zoomed into it nearly 100%. I mean, we can check the numbers on the top, but basically for print resolution, the minimum you're always using is twice the DPI at actual size for your line screen. That's what you got to find out from your printer. So we used to run it like a 144, 133 line screen. So our minimum DPIs were always 300 DPIs. Okay, so I'm about to put the background in. Oh, and sorry, I'll just pause this and I'll get back to the discussion. In the case of this, these days, because the computers are faster and can handle more, Dave scanned it at 600. I dropped it down to 400 just for ease of use while recording it. But honestly, I could probably do it at 600. 600 to 400. If you're doing covers, you know, or pinups, 400 is a good resolution. If you're doing pages, you don't need anything more than 300, which works out.
I only actually started scanning at 6 because every once in a while at a convention they'll make a big poster of it, something that would be, you know, life size even or larger, and that works at really practical.
I do the exact same thing because we don't know what the final end of these results of these, you know, what the usage ends are going to be of our artwork. So we often, when we scan, we work as large as possible, as much as we can handle. Even when we're coloring, especially pinups and promo pieces, we're looking at the highest res possible because it gives us the best use flexibility down the line. If we want to turn this into a banner or if we want to make a lunchbox out of it or something, we just, you know, it's about having the most flexibility. Mm-hmm. Okay, so interrupt me if there's more questions, but basically we're about to start jumping into background. So what I'm doing right now is I separate the layers out. I've got, if you can see background layer 2, if you can see my mouse down here.
I can, yeah.
Background, basically what I do is I'm now creating a layer that is essentially, let's see if we can, before I start.
So going back to the,
there you go, right there.
Going back to the color palette question I had, Peter, do you like to put the background in first to try help inform that palette?
There's actually a different logic to both of them. I would say I'm 75, 25, usually background environment first. And this is just because of a preference that I like, where I like to set the mood. So even when it comes to doing pages, a lot of times I'm going to figure out what time of day it is, what environment they're in, because that'll help inform a lot of the lighting. If I need to just crank, or if I get stuck on what I want to do with the background, you know, got to keep working, got to keep progressing. So I'll start on the figure and just be like, look, I'm going to lay out some basic stuff with the figure and start thinking about the background. But in this case, because the whole idea was to be glorious and awesome, there's a lot of different things that we could end up doing with the figure. So I'm like, let me let the background inform what I'm going to do with the figure, decide what I want to do ahead of time with the background. And when I got something settled that I like, I didn't know how long I'd be experimenting at it. Could be 8 hours, could be 15 hours until I get a pattern background set up that I like. Sometimes it happens very quickly in 30 minutes. In this case, everything kind of worked together, and you'll see it as it flowed. There was a little bit of pre-thinking and planning because I knew this was going to be a talk and a video. So there was some things that I tried before off camera, but yes, there's a lot of it's background first, informing what I do in lighting setup. Because Dave, you know, being Dave, thinking ahead, you know, he can do a lot of heavy blacks, but on this one, he left this open so that there is some general informative lines as far as where he indicated lighting, but he did leave a lot of it open that in case I needed to interpret one way or the other, I could see he gave me the flexibility to do that, even in his metals where Dave has a lot of structure, but here he kind of just didn't like on, and I'm assuming it's on purpose, but he can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically there's a general upper right-hand side lighting cast with a secondary lighting on the, you know, on the back left, but
The truth is, it's totally just a cipher. I have to admit.
Yeah,
there are times
a lot of artists default that way. I mean, there's a neck shadow that's on most guys' stuff. That's just guys and girls. Most people's things. That's kind of just there. It's nebulous one way or the other. It's
it's a trap. You get into a habit where it's just how you do it. And when it comes to reflections, that really is kind of how I do it. It's something I should probally,
No, because you change it up when you're making a deliberate thought, but the rest of the time, a lot of it, for default storytelling, it doesn't require much.
And there is
younger artists, because they don't know their light sources so well. Sometimes I have to compete with something that's different on a face, that's different on a body, that's different. Then you really have to start like problem solving and going, how am I going to make all these different light sources on the same person work? What do I ignore? What do I enhance? What do I, just to make it all seem cohesive?
Now, I feel like
your mental is solid, so you're pretty good. Anyway, let me do some process, and you can talk for a second, Dave, just because we're right at that point in the video, so I can get to it.
Okay.
For the guys who are asking details. So what happens is I duplicate one because I use what I can do is turning the eyeball off on the channel allows me to go back to the layer, and select things with the magic wand from the layer without actually corrupting the layer. So it's sort of like a master flat file. Basically, I can go back and select sections and keep working. That's why you see me doing multiples. But what I'm about to do right now is create a layer that has no background. I'm deleting all the background areas, so only the figure is there. Everything else is transparent because I'm prepping to the background. Float the wings. The wings are going to need to be screened because they're semi-transparent. So I set those up, delete the wings from the transparent color layer. And now we're basically in a color scheme that is not offensive to my eyeballs, generally meets the dark skin tone, dark tones requirements it's sort of like looking at a figure in a shadow. And then I can start prepping the background because I know, my train of thought is there and I'm ready to start just, prepping it up. So these are cloud photos that I took from an airplane, annoying somebody probably because my window was open and they were trying to sleep. But, I think it was a trip to Toronto. I just was like, hey, these are cool clouds. I start taking pictures with the camera or my phone now that we're older and there's fancier phones. They kind of just sit around and I pluck them if I need to use them. Since she seemed to be flying, I was like, let's see if anything works. I did pre-search these. That's why you can see some of them flagged as green because I'm like, okay, this one might be working. But I wanted you guys to see what kind of options I go through when I look at this stuff. The window on the right-hand side or the left-hand side is just more textures and stuff that I've built up, things that I create either with painting brushes, just gesso, just generic gesso things on canvas. These are just textures and things that I use to create backgrounds of interest, that have multi-layers of textures and coloring. So, all right, well, that cycles through. Dave, you willing to ask something?
Yeah, I had two things, actually. The first one, we had a question, and let me get back up here. This is from Jay Rolami. And he asks, is it recommended to use layer modes to color, or can I use normal ones only? Modes always feel weird and hard to use.
Modes, it's a matter of how you feel. Usually modes only come into me for me when I'm making final adjustments. In other words, I've colored something up and I'm not exactly sure, like, hey, well, would it look better with a little bit of a yellow cast? So I put an overlay, layer adjustment to it. Because I learned on a simpler version of Photoshop, we were much more tied to traditional artistry. There was not a lot of fancy layer adjustments. As Dave talked about, back in the early days of Photoshop, there was no such thing as an overlay layer. You could overlay fill, but there was only one layer. There was, you just colored everything. It was basically like creating a painting or a colored pencil illustration or any other thing. You were doing it on a single piece of canvas. Mm-hmm. So I can still create without any of these layers, maybe just a line art layer above a color layer. We just go through and, faux paint the whole thing. I mean, it's what you can do now is determined by what your stylistics, what you want the piece to look like in the end. There is adjustable, stuff that you can do with a lot of different layer options. Mine is just the different layers show the different. I need a different layer for wings because it has to have a specific effect for grace. The rest of the stuff is all completed on a single layer. When you watch me do the coloring, except for one stage, which we'll get to for the most part, everything is just rendered up on that single layer as if it was just flat.
All right. Oh, sorry, Peter.
No, I was going to say, here I'm just dropping in a quick crop. There's a certain area where Dave's line art ends. But so I want to be like, okay, well, you know, not knowing what we're going to use this for, this is just saying that's where the line art ends. I don't want to spend a lot of time working on detail that's past the edge of basically usable art.
Yeah.
So I kind of just drop this general crop in and started giving me borders. Also, you know, black is a nice eyeball rest. Go ahead, Dave.
All right. So Jazz Noir Studios, it says he's partially colorblind, red and green. He can tell the difference if they are a different tone. He'd really like to get into digital. I can't say it. Digital coloring, though. Do you have any advice?
Do that again.
So he's partially colorblind. He has trouble with red and green, and he wants to know if you have any advice. I don't know if this is something that you'd really know about, but
actually, go ahead. I mean, we both knew somebody who's red and green colorblind and is a fantastic colorist. Liquid, who colored Dave for years, one half of that team. There were two guys. One half of that team has a fairly good, fairly solid color blindness.
Yeah.
What he did was he learned through basically just asking people the way anyone who has a slight, you know, difference in the world says, hey, is this red to you? And learned it by the CMYK numbers. You'll see it in our color palette down here. Let me see if I can move my mouse. That's color adjustment pattern down here will tell us what we can, you know, set individual numbers to tell us what a CMYK is. So he learned that 100% magenta, 100% yellow was the purest red you can make. So even though he sees it as gray, he knows what that is and adjusts it. It actually gives his work kind of a unique feel to it because he's seeing it in a slightly different way than anybody else is because he's looking at it more tonally.
Yeah, you know, he colored me for quite a while, and he was phenomenal. He also colored Joe Mad on a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he did the Ultimates with Joe Mad and a few other projects. Beautiful stuff. Yeah. So yeah,
it's no hamperment whatsoever. You just like everything else. You got something that's different. You learn a little workaround. If you want to do this, you can do this. The way I'd say to start doing this is not really about approaching your deficiency. It's more about just getting your solid art skills ready, and you know, then you just figure it out. You know, it's figuring out the nitty gritty about how to keep it working.
I think it also speaks to the fact that value is so important.
Oh yeah,
because if your values are correct,
I'm developing the background. This is all tonally. What I've done is it was placed because I like certain cloud shapes. It has nothing to do with what the actual final is going to be. I'm not really using the clouds as a cut and paste sticking in there. They're going to be a base as a selection tool. So I've copied them. Once I've got them, like, okay, I like this shape. I like the shape of this on this kind of creates. And I'm a lot of it using my imagination because you can see the layers weren't transparent. They were just solid. But I'm like, you know, I know this is where we get into what I know about composition, design, well, you know, what kind of building direction and flow on a piece based on what Dave drew and where I need to keep the reader's eye drawn and just, you know, the stuff I need to create. So I made those decisions while I was pasting things in and checking and sizing. So copy them, put them onto alpha channels, and now I'm just adjusting them into black and white. And we're going to adjust that one, paste that in. I'm going to darken up the areas that I need dark. I just kind of want cloud structure without too much adherence to really cloud the anatomy of these particular clouds. You'll see it in a second about what it is. At this point, I don't have a firm idea of what I'm doing with the background. These were just shapes that I liked that contributed to the proper dynamics for the background. What the clouds are is immaterial, and whatever pasture that was flying over, which is probably like lower Ontario, you know, it's nothing really that important. It has nothing to do with the fact that Dave lives in Ontario and I'm, you know, possibly showing his farmland outside his house. But
right. And this is all the burn tool here.
yeah, this is just burn tool. So it does the same thing that it was doing in my line art, now just in a larger, a larger brush and more randomness. I'm not being specific. If I was really photo correcting this, I'd be like in there, like figuring out what tones I'm pulling in and out. I'm just trying to get the dark areas a little darker and the bright areas a little brighter.
All right. We have a super chat from Waiter Shush. I put this on the screen a minute ago, but he says, wow, Peter and David together on a work meeting and having this on mute. Unfortunately, he's going to have to watch it afterwards. He says, Aspen's been a big influence for me for art. Glad to contribute to the Turner Legacy book. Thank you.
Thank you all. And thank you guys all for the super chats.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so here now we're basically, so what I've done is, just like the layer masks that were happening above the adjustment for the line art, the color knockouts, the same theory is over here. I'm basically having a flat blue colored layer because the color at this point is not important. I'm laying it in to see whether or not the selections that are in my imagination kind of work on the page. And then I use the alpha channels as a layer mask to adjust what section of that layer is revealed. So I'm kind of just playing here. This green may or may not stay. It was intended. The green actually wasn't entirely accidental. It was just the color I was going to stick in there. Maybe it's the colors of Ukraine, but basically it's sort of, hey, gold, blue, green, purple, nice colors. Because SoulFire, and as far as being glorious, a lot of it relies on rainbows. It's just one of the things that I found that works well color-wise, not only to attract people, but just to show awesomeness. There's a full color spectrum in the rainbow. You control that. Grace has the full spectrum in her hair, but other times you're like, okay, I want to have just the cool end, just the warm end. How much of it you're putting in there, you put in there. But when it comes to full glorious, at some level, the full spectrum kind of comes into it, and it's pretty glorious. If you want like angelic glorious, a lot of it's more in the gold and orange tones, and if you want evil glorious, then a lot of it's purples and blues. It's no hard and fast rules, but
as you say it all goes purple and blue.
Yeah, as it goes purple and blue, because this is just me experimenting, and just coloring in, just adjusting, seeing how I like it. I'll play with some levels of the mask so that it's darker, lighter than the original intended channel, which again, that was just roughs. Just trying different layer options. If you were just asking about how we handle with adjustment layers, I'm putting those in to see if they end up being working. If they give me any effect that I like, if I start seeing something that I, like, then I'm going to continue on with it. If I'm not, then I'd start taking a different tact. If you saw the bottom floor cloud, for lack of a better word, layer has already been turned off and is not being used because I saw it. And once I realized that it's not going to work with the perspective, it kind of just killed everything. I'm not going to use it. It's still there in case I find some reason for it. But the way the perspective worked with the clouds going back, casting in the difference, it was creating an antithetical dynamic to what we're talking about compositionally here.
Yeah, it's already looking like it's really starting to form into kind of a cohesive.
Exactly it. This is where my brain just starts, the logical process started working. I liked the green, so I'm like, okay, I hadn't planned it. I'm going to try to keep it in, but it still needs some oranges. It needs some glory. We're going to bring the yellow red section back of the spectrum back in, but it's too much. All right, so let's start throwing some blue back in here. This is art for the same reason that it's all experimentation. I've been doing this for, how old are we, Dave? For a long time.
Too old.
There's still no plus minus zero sum version of this that we just, doing this in a systematic approach. A lot of this is just playing with things until it looks right, especially when it comes to pinups and single pieces. Pages.
Sorry, Peter. I think there are ways with everything to get very systematic, and you can go very, very quickly, but really to do your best work and make it something that really stands out. It has to be done this way. It has to,
because you're always looking to improve on what you know before. So there, this cloud trick, I've done this before, not this particular combination, but I have, a general steps of how I can experiment with things. But I've also gotten through this whole stage that you're going to see, decided for certain pieces that it just doesn't work. Dump all of them and go to a pattern, go to ray bursts, go to, like different things that I know might work. But if it's just not coming together, then it's time to just abandon it. And there's lots of other options to play with.
Yep.
So,
sorry.
You can really see the importance here of keeping things grouped into separate layers. Going back to the one gentleman's question earlier, is you can change anything at any point. You can change the hue. Having it broken up this way, you're not locked into a certain direction.
Yeah, this is where layers are wonderful. And if you see, there's really no adjustment layer other than the transparency mask that's on there. That's allowing me to keep areas transparent to see the layer below it. They're just set to normal. There's nothing different about it. I'm just taking this big fat giant brush and it's just a regular base default brush that you open up within Photoshop, a soft round 200 brush, which is now I guess it's 1200, and just scooting it around, throwing in some colors, saying this looks good. Nope, I need to adjust this a little bit. You'll see me go into, I'm pointing again at the screen that you guys can't see. You'll see me come in here and this is my color palette and adjusting. This is set to CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow color, which is what we use, the 4 colors we use in printing. But I'll be creating colors and fine tuning, adjusting them more so when I get to skin tones, things like that. But right now it's just, you'll see my cursor occasionally dive down in here or select out of this giant, massive color palette up here the colors that I need or I think work best. This is just getting into the artistry part, which, is something we could spend a whole nother day discussing. But right now we're just, this is just watch me goof off. This is how the decision-making process means to get to where we're actually going to get to with this background. So as I realized I like this green more, I'm bringing it back in because the yellow was just too intense. We also have, because this is a project where we have a lot of pinups and other art of grace, there's been a lot of other pieces where I did some heavy yellow. And so I'm like, okay, I don't want this to, not knowing what we're going to use this for, I was like, let's not make this, take the chance that it's going to blend into some other pieces that already exist. So I did take into consideration that there is some other stuff. So now I'm just adjusting the top layer. And this is a good point to bring up for me, what a crucial piece in whether or not your coloring works and stands out from other people's things as part of your stylistics is mid-tone, foreground, and background. Maybe not in that order because I guess it's background, mid-tone, foreground, but whatever. And Dave and Eric has covered a lot of times in painting. You have a base color, which matters quite a bit. Then you have an in-between color, and that can really change the dynamic because there are sections of these clouds that are, again, I'm pointing at the wrong area of the screen, but there are sections in these clouds that are the same yellow. The same yellow that's up here is the same yellow that's down here, but one has green behind it and one has orange behind it, and it gives it an entirely different look. Most of my career is made about controlling that mid-tone because there's a huge difference between transitioning from a purple to a yellow through the warm range and a purple to the yellow through the cool range, up to the blue, green to yellow versus purple to magenta to red to orange to yellow. I mean, how you do this and how you decide to create this environment is really what's going to set your artistry apart from other people because they're going to make a decision in a different way.
So we have Color with Kurt here. Thank you so much. Yeah, so now the pressure is on. Kurt is a phenomenal colorist. He actually colored Spider-Man Captain America picture that I did just about 2 months ago. It came out amazingly well on his YouTube channel. So,
my ego's so wounded. I'm quitting. Kurt, that's fantastic.
You, Peter.
I'll come watch your YouTube channel and I'll steal stuff from you. But no, I mean, look, we borrow stuff from each other. I jest a little bit, but we're artists. We see somebody else, something that someone else is doing that's cool. the first thing we're going to do is try to figure out a way to incorporate it in our own thing. Good ideas are good ideas. We pass them around all the time. I've seen artists offer advice to developing artists over the years and say things like, don't copy. I'm like, no, copy. This is how you learn. This is how we absorb. This is how we grow ourselves, is to see things that we find are awesome and say, how do I put that into mine? How do I make mine better in that way?
Yes, I try and say that all the time. And there are times I feel like I'm just saying to people, just copy. I did a thing on noses a couple weeks ago, and half the video was really me just copying other people's noses. But this is how you do it. This is how you learn. So, I feel like I'd be lying to not say that.
Yeah, no, art is a lot of, on a base level, about judgment. It's about your personal tastes, what you like, because you stop doing a piece of art when you're done, when you like it, what you got. And all the decisions that you made up till then is about the things that you like to see. So the more stuff that you expose yourself to, the more things you'll realize that you like, and the more things that will influence your art. But whether or not your art is good or bad or other things is basically your judgment about how you create the piece, and then other people judging your judgment. If they agree with what the decisions you've made, then you become a popular artist because they like your decision-making process.
So I see you're starting to actually color with a paintbrush now.
So now I have a brushy tool, which I guess I could have started in the beginning and laying all this in, but I figured I'd start with clouds to shorthand it, because there's a certain randomness in nature that, I'll never get to, or just takes longer to kind of do in there. It started with the basic clouds, but it is something that texturally mimics the clouds. But once I hit the level where the actual photographs get me, I'm like, okay, I need to start refining the shapes, fine-tuning the composition of the light. So now I'm turning back into either a soft round brush. You'll see the brushes change in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. But it's either the soft round brush or jumping back to the irregular, scritchy, cloudy looking thing.
Now, the scritchy, cloudy looking thing, is that a brush that just comes with Photoshop, or is that something?
It is something that I've adjusted, but there's a similar one that's available in Photoshop. I don't remember what their title is. Maybe it's Clouds, something like that. But I don't know whether it's in there now. But now there's a whole range of automatic brushes and other brushes you can buy. I have a lot of my own custom-made brushes, because back in the day, before they have all these things automatically or purchasable, we had to make them. So there's often lots of dirty inked up pieces of just scrap paper in the photos in the studio offices, and still is in mine, where you lay down a chunk of ink on a napkin, something that had texture or just some brushy sections, scan that in, turn that into a brush, and that becomes a thing.
I remember you doing that.
So these are basically, it's a dual brush. So there's one that's kind of got some irregular edges, and there's another brush that cuts it out from it. We'll get into in some other level if we ever do another discussion. It's a specific thing about how to make brushes.
Are you saying you do this again?
We can do this again anytime you want.
We'll do that. So
yeah, something I'm really in awe about here is just the amount of care you're putting into the background. Even personally, a lot of times the background just becomes an afterthought, and this is just it's so cool to see the care and the detail that you're putting in here is definitely a lesson for me as I'm watching this.
Well, for two reasons. Number one, like I said, the key word I'm going for in my brain the whole time I'm thinking about this is glorious. The second thing is, Dave and I have, over the years talked about a lot of the same influences, painters, things that we've looked at. So I know what would impress him, and I'm trying to impress him. You're always trying to elevate the person's work that you're working with. And so here it's like, this is, not my Michael Turner, but there's, Turner the painter. There's other things in here that are, not Mucha is probably not the right one I'm thinking of. Toulouse-Lautrec. There's just other, impressionists that I'm influenced by, that I know Dave's looked at over the. These are just, look, this is how to make some really glorious clouds. Let's throw some in. Let's make this really awesome, because at the end of the day, her arms spread like this. This is a somewhat ode to some classical angelic figures. This is just Grace being awesome. So let's really have the background match up and elevate what is down there. So I don't mind coming up with a lot of structure. In fact, I prefer to do a lot of structure and this kind of things. But as you see, it's selective structure. I'm not doing every single cloud. The stuff to this left-hand corner, this left-hand side over here, was kind of just the basic clouds from before. There's not a lot of painting I'm doing here to refine it. I'm spending time painting in the crevices and bringing out some outlines here of just coloring. And this is not, for the most part, screening or color dodging or any of the other fancy effects. This is just me picking a yellow, putting it on top. It's straight painting process. Just happens to be on a computer with a Wacom tablet. It's the same thing you would do if you were doing it on an artboard. When your studio dipping your paint into a thing. Same process. But yeah, this is just me noodling into stuff, knowing what cloud shapes are. Like, I'm going to bring stuff back in. You're going to see that. I'll maybe speed this up a little bit because there's a lot to cover on the figure too. But
yeah, we definitely want to get to the figure. Absolutely. Now, I don't want to just
you have to play back just slightly.
everything, but
this faster. But this is just cloud structure. So the nice reverse triangle, reverse pyramid shape works really well to focus everything. It works also well with the dynamics Dave set up with the widespread wings and the pointy toes. So let's just focus everything in the bottom middle V, and structure everything up. So let's answer some more questions while we just let this run. This is just me noodling right now.
JDST is here. He says, this is fantastic. I've wanted to see Peter work and discuss process for 20 years. It's a long time to wait. And Bruno Nucci, and I apologize, Bruno, if I said that wrong. I have a feeling I might have, says, steal from one is copying, steal from many, it's art. Yeah. Now for me, I found I would steal from one.
Yeah.
And take it as far as I can, and then find someone else and take that. And, eventually it hammers into a style. I found that it was more difficult for me to just look at multiple different artists all at once. So I would really try and get as much as I can from an artist. And obviously that's only a fraction of what, that artist actually does when you do that. But yeah, for me, I've got, for my main artists, probably 6 or 7, main influences.
Yeah, I mean, the key difference, I think, as far as copying and stealing is simply how you use it. If you're going to trace something, claim it as your own, and put it into a final published piece, that's stealing. That's fraud. That's plagiarism. That's straight up bad copying. The stuff that we're talking about is learning copying. You're putting it in a sketchbook. You're incorporating lines. You see a shape you like. You're learning that shape. And in this case, I'm stealing from nature or God. So maybe I'll get smote at some point, but these are cloud shapes that I've seen. These are lighting situations that I've looked at and learned from and growing up, my whole life, life as an adult, stuff when I pay attention. Once you start doing art, you start looking at these things more to pay attention. But we're not taking straight out somebody's previous invention and sticking it into our final artwork. We're putting it into our learning process. That's good copying. That's just learning.
It is. Now, Mike Stewart has a question. He says, did Michael Turner make final approvals on covers back in the day, or did he trust you to finalize the pieces?
There's actually a good story. Mike did do it. He had notes in the beginning. He had notes in the end. He had notes in the middle. And as you can see here in this bottom little corner of these clouds, this is actually a good example of where I screw up. I put stuff in there and I'm like, wait, this is ugly. Hang on, let me spend like 10 minutes trying to fix it. Mike and I actually got into an argument because there was a section when we were first starting out Aspen where he was becoming very controlling because there was a lot of other stuff going on, and I'm not going to get into it, but it was the only thing that he was able to control was the artwork. I mean, for the most part, we all are confident enough in each other's abilities that we'll give general notes at the beginning if we have thoughts, and we'll let the other person do their art the best way that they know how. And if we see something that strikes us as wrong, will make notes on it. Dave will do that with all of his colorists, things like that. For the most part, let them work. And then if there's some problem, not. If he sees like, I don't see a red lighting here, I need this to be a certain kind of mood, we say that ahead of time. If you don't say it,
the last time I've ever,
you've never done that?
Have I ever given you one correction ever? I don't think so.
You've given me corrections. There's
really?
And maybe not like in the last few years, but definitely in the beginning. And that's about the foundation of the relationship. It was learning what you liked and what you didn't like. Even with this, I said, when I sent you the email, as you see with some of the things that decisions I made as a final, I was like, wasn't sure you'd like it, but I took a little latitude and, you ended up being okay with it. But with Mike, he went through everything. And there was a point where we actually ended up having a discussion because it was like, look, I know this is the part of your life that you can control right now. So it's what you're doing, but you're starting to basically send me these passive aggressive signals that whatever I'm doing is not good enough because I know this is fine. This is just a judgment call between your artistry and my artistry. Someone's passing me a note. I'll go read it in a second. But this is just a difference between your artistry and my artistry. So honestly, it's 50-50. So yes, you're the boss. You own the company. I will listen to you. But, either start letting some of this stuff go or I'm going to start getting more annoyed. Artists fight. Seems all serious time, but an hour later, everybody's okay. But, it's just one of those things where it happens. But I know that my job is the end of the line. I have, Dave has two bosses essentially, other than himself and Meredith. He has an editor and he has a writer. If there's, if those two people exist on there, then I have editors, writers, inkers, pencilers, all those people ahead of me, who may have opinions. And then I have to be conscious of what the letterer is going to do and backward, after that. So basically I have 4 bosses behind generally, if not more, and a couple ahead. So I know that I have to be flexible for changes. When I was a young artist, I got super attached to every baby that I created. It was so hard to make any changes. I get so deep, soul-suckingly mad that I'm like, that green was so important to me. Why are you making me fix it? You're stupid. But now I'm like, look, I've seen things that I've put out that audiences gravitated to that I'm so surprised that they did. I've seen other things that I thought that they would hate that they all turned out to love. And so then I learned and I start putting that in. There's a flexibility in the audience and within my own artwork that honestly,
Now, I want to say the brush that you're using right now really feels to me as I'm watching it, so much of the style I associate with you looks like this brush. So is this like a very common one for you to use?
This is actually, it's a little bit of adjustment of basically the basic Photoshop pencil brush. It's just set to taper, not all the way to a total fine point at the edges of my, like if I press less, it's not like a super fine point. Mm-hmm. The setting is probably about like 30% size reduction. And then it is squished just a little bit, and then it's just about pressure sensitivity. It's just like a paintbrush. I mean, we call it a pencil tool, but what it is it's a hard-edged brush. There's no softness to it because it's a hair piece. I don't want a lot of fuzziness. I'm trying to create rainbow stripes, so I want this to be as firm as possible. When you see the skin tones, it'll get more, fuzzy. But I'm just laying it in, I started developing this style with her hair where I'm starting to pull random strands in just because it's something that organically grew out of it. I did Grace's hair much different back in 2002, 2003 when we were inventing her than I do now. But the only adjustment that's different than the Photoshop version is the Photoshop version is initially round. I was having problems tucking that into the right proper tight corner because, you can make a circle and oval, but it still won't kind of stick into a tight spot. So what I did was I did a diamond, a straight up square diamond in the beginning, and that didn't work because it gave me no matter how tight the spacing was between the brush, I still got these stepping like saw teeth, shark teeth, so So what I did is I rounded the edges off, and then it became smooth, just like what you're seeing. So basically, it's just a rounded diamond instead of a circle. And I can make it fat, I can make it wide, I can, so if I make it really flat, it actually works like a calligraphy pen, where on one sweep, if I angle the pen one way, I get a fat, wide cast to my pen.
Do you
and if
just
I angle it the other way, then it's narrow. Depends on how I'm angling my pen.
Do you just do that on the fly, or do you have different brush settings and you just pick that different brush that you've already preset?
You can do it on the fly these days because the Wacom tablets do recognize tilt of the pen, pressurizing. I like a little bit more precise control, so I don't do that, like pen rotation and actual angle of, if you're holding it this way, it will angle the brush this way, and if you like this, then it'll angle. It does that for you now. There's a lot of options. I simply control it in my brush panel. If I need it to be at a 45-degree angle as a base, then I do that, and if not. So here's where we did with the line art knockout. So basically now I turned it into a softer green that I can deal with, but we still want Dave worked so hard on his hair. I know you did, but still, you worked really, it's the line, his lines are good. Dave always has line weights and flow and bases. So basically I don't want to lose any of that. I just wanted to lose the blackness of it to separate the rainbow prettiness. So now it's just bringing in the, the tonality and just sort of putting the rainbow in the line art knockouts. And this
that was a question I had, and spoiler alerts, I've seen a bit further along in the process. But where you actually do this some more is, how do you decide which lines you really want to colorize?
I will answer that in 1 second. I got to go grab this note.
Yep. This is looking great.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
All right, it's a note that I don't understand, but I'll have to ask Frank later.
I wish that
Frank can come back into my office because I know he's watching his feet and he can tell me what this note means. But anyhow, I decide in two ways. In the stuff that I knocked out ahead of time are pure, let's call it functionality knockouts. I know that I want Grace's hair to be softer. I want the lines that the penciler worked hard to put in, regardless of it being David's, any penciler, their lines. I'm there to elevate their artwork. I'm not there to erase their artwork. So I want those to be in there, but I don't want them to just overpower. So I'm knocking those out. Same thing with the wings. I want them to be seen, but not like, punchy. The rest of the stuff kind of comes and goes because I'm assessing as I'm working on the piece what it looks like. I'm coming back to the flat layer for something I need to adjust. I was like, you know what? I need a secondary light source here, but the reason why I apply it this way is it gives me some flexibility in adjusting it later. Basically, I only have to worry about one light source on one layer. The secondary light source will be on a top floating layer. And I do this especially when I have a lot of complicated light sources, see a second or a third. That way it's like, you know what? I'll figure this out. And I do this mostly for pinups, covers, single issue, single item, or single figure setups, or even multiple figure setups, but something that's just a single illustration. On panels, in pages, once we've established the environment, I'm just going. So a lot of the stuff is just one piece. And like, I'm not doing a lot of layer separation. I don't have a separate layer for lighting, things like that, because, the panel is a different logic. Okay, so now this is just me roughing in the line, just me roughing in the yellow back glow that I'm going to want to see. It's not important that it's final now. We'll come back to it and I'll adjust it. This is just for me to kind of, in my brain, get the sketch down so I generally know where it's going. So as you can see, I'm leaving some areas blank because I know that we want it to be either a shadow area or it's being blocked by the figure behind. Elevating your artwork with something that's as simple as a drop shadow, remembering what elements are behind or in front it, stopping a cast of light, will cement your character into the environment, will cement your environment to the character. It will give you a level of realism that the audience will understand on a psychological level, but not be stuck to, but it will make your stuff really pop and work from everybody else's because you're paying attention to the little details. for the most part, most people just kind of will blow right by it, but it's what sets it apart in your level of realism and adjustment.
So, Jared,
go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, sorry about that. Jared Lamy actually has a good question. Some along the lines of what I was going to mention is he said many colorists work with almost exclusively the lasso tool. You, on the other hand, seem to color normally. What is your opinion on that? So the whole cut and grad and lasso versus painterly.
You know what? Back in technology, this is a technology development. When in the beginning there wasn't anything except the lasso tool, and then we would be able to, there wasn't a lot of pressure sensitivity. There was sort of just cut out a shape, brush within that shape, and then cut out another shape and brush within that shape. So if you look at our older things, probably pre-99, that's what everybody's looked like, because that's how you had to color with Photoshop. So that remains in the repertoire stylistically if I need it. Once we started getting pen pressures and things like that, there were a lot of blending issues that I didn't like with that style. So as soon as I could have something that could be pressure sensitive and allow me to blend smoother and more like painting, I started going that way. It will still happen, especially when I'm doing metals. It will still happen when I'm doing designy things, or if I need to have a specific artistic attitude toward it, like an anime style or something that stylistically has already been established to have that as an element of its existence. I will definitely bring all of that stuff back in there. So this is just, I like to make it an artistic representation of sort of what a real skin looks like. This is just me making an artistic choice. So that's why I generally blend it. So here, all this lighting is generally based on what Dave nominally set up with his black patterns. Like you said, he defaults to an upper right, light source and with a back left cast. And so that's kind of what I'm filling in here. So pencil tool on the tougher, harder areas of the body, fingers, knuckles, bones, and big soft brush, soft edges. Again, I'm pointing at my own screen, which the internet can't see because I'm stupid. But softer brushes for, breasts, stomach, wider areas of the skin cast, because we don't want that to be harsh. As I refine the highlights, I'll come back in and I'll use the pencil tool again on just like tips of noses, lip shines, clavicle bits. But for the most part here, I'm constructing all with a broad, wide brush.
Now, I don't know that a lot of people know this, but you draw quite a bit too.
Yes.
And you've done books that way. How much does that really inform the kind of coloring, lighting choices that you're making?
It's hard to say because, starting as a colorist, because I came in, it's not as a colorist. I came in as a complete artist. Coloring was the job that I got because my penciling wasn't as awesome as some people, Dave. But no, I mean, the thing is that this is what I was better at than the people who were coming in. So this is the slot that I got, which is totally fine with. But it's hard to say how that informed it, but it definitely means that if someone just had knowledge of color theory, I have knowledge of anatomy, which then adds a little influence. But honestly, you start doing this job for a little bit, you got to learn how the human form works and how other forms work. If you don't know it, you're going to pick it up pretty quick. And the better you are at it, the better there is. So the lessons that I've learned drawing from Dave, from other people, all throughout my career, or just things I've learned on my own, definitely do inform how I approach the anatomy, how I approach the lighting. And I'm always looking at photography, other things like that, as to ways to better improve the artistry of my lighting setup, how I describe and elevate a form. Because, do I want to tuck her rib cage under? Do I want a big shadow? Is that going to make her look too gaunt? Or do I want to just keep this smooth? Now, ladies, generally, yes, you're smoother. Boys, you can get more into the cracks and the crevices of their musculature. But also, if someone's got powerful muscles, you want to still accentuate them. It's just a level of refinement or non-refinement. You know,
Right.
whether you want to.
I've got
with the rendering or not. Go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, I've got two here. I've got Eva One has a super chat for $5. Thank you very much, Eva One.
Thank you,
Peter. Besides Mike and obviously Dave, who are some of your favorite artists to color? And he also asked this, but you don't have to answer this part. He says, "And what artists have been a nightmare to color, and why?"
There's no one that's really been a nightmare. I've always said, and this doesn't necessarily apply to coloring, this applies to all of my freelance stuff. The best kind of clients are the ones that either give you specific instructions and you're just emulating what they want. You just delivering them what they're looking for, or the ones that kind of give you nothing and say, just, hey, do whatever you want and we're happy with it. Everybody's kind of really more in between that stage. I don't pick favorites, and this has nothing to do with not wanting to hurt Dave's feelings. This is just me. I don't do top 5 lists. This is my personality. I just don't, because there's so much range and flexibility in different things. There's really cool stuff about doing Dave's. One of the things I love about Dave's artwork is he has his lighting in his brain. Whether or not he's really consciously making decisions about where he's going to put it, it's all there. So his secondary light sources, I can really do fun stuff with the color because he's differentiated it so much. Guys like Michael Turner were really open in their light sources, so he wanted secondary light sources, but it's up to me to really start crafting them out of the gap spaces that he had.
But he wouldn't fight you either, which is
he wouldn't fight
nice.
me either. I mean, Mike and I had a long working relationship, so over that time where it was just me and him, we learned what each other did well. So he would leave me skies and say, hey, look, you do great skies. I'm not even going to bother drawing clouds anymore because you just delete them. And I'd say, hey, could you give me a little more structure on this when you do these kind of things? Because that, it makes it all look better. And it was all a give and take and a play. I approach everybody a little bit differently. There are basic stuff that makes me me, but how I start an Arthur Adams piece versus how I start a Campbell piece versus how I start a Finch or a John Romita or Todd McFarlane, all these things that I've done are all a little bit different because every artist has different things that they like, but different things in their artwork that need to be pulled out and accentuated and revived. So where are we on time? I want to make sure that
we are at 9:12, and actually I want to take right now quickly to remind everyone that SoulFire the Core is available on Kickstarter right now. There's a link in the top of the chat and also in the description of the video. And Peter very kindly showing us all of his techniques for coloring over a picture that I did on Monday live on the same channel. And so, yeah, hopefully you guys will give SoulFire the Core a chance. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, incredible artwork. Written by JT Kroll, who I haven't seen, Peter. It's been years. I haven't seen.
Yeah, it's been a while. We've got to get back up there. Thanks
Yeah,
to COVID.
absolutely.
I haven't been to Canada in a while.
Yeah.
But to go back to and further elucidate on that question, there are favorite elements that I have. I love coloring Arthur. And the thing about my career is I've been privileged to work with people that you end up, you first start reading when you're a fan and you finally get to work with them. I remember the first piece that I colored with Arthur. I'm like, I get to work with Arthur Adams. This is so cool. Then you really want to show it off. Dave, we grew up together. We started at the studio within, 6 months of each other. We were there. So, we saw each other develop. So it's kind of like, Dave again. No, I'm just kidding. I love working with Dave. It's the elements that each of these guys create give me a different level of excitement and lets me bounce around. I have a agitated and curious mind. If I'm doing the same thing all the time, it does get a little frustrating. So I like the variety. I like the challenges of coming up with other things like that. The worst guys, there's not been that many, but usually it's all about clients, notes, other things like that. Not always in comics. A lot of the stuff that's out in advertising. It's just about how the other side behaves to your own art and there. So this is where a few times I use adjustment brushes. I'm kind of just using an overlay to brush in this, make a nose a little pinker, make the cheeks a little pinker. But for the most part, like I said, everything else is built in steps of dark to light, in a general painterly process. I know where the lights are going to be. You know, I know where the light is coming from, how to form a figure, just through years of study, practice, and things like that. And I just build it like a painting. It's just one on top of the other.
Yeah, at this stage, it feels very much just like painting. Aside from the ability to do an overlay, but really an overlay even works a lot like using a glaze with painting. So
it's a glaze. So here we get into what Eric was asking about, whether or not I decided to artistically do it. It was the rib cage, that one severe rib cage on the left-hand side, that prompted me to say, hey, you know what, let me knock this out. Let me see if I can make this a little more subtle. So again, what I'm doing is here, just blocking in big chunks of knockout in one color. And then I will come in and I will lock the transparency on that layer. And so that I don't affect any other layers. And then I'll take a big fat brush and I'll come in and I'll gently adjust the areas, so that it's the proper color for what it is, to not only show the line art, but not not make it too much where I felt areas where it was too much.
Yeah, well,
not make it just dissolve it all, because that's the whole point. Is this is a Dave Finch piece, so you have to show the Dave Finch lines.
At the same time, though, Peter,
horrible at it.
I struggle so much. It's very since my art is so based on shadow, it's really difficult for me to open up and not put that in there. And I tried with this picture pretty far, but you can still see there are places where I feel like you knocked out just on some of her chest there and her rib cage, and it looks so much better. Just push back a little bit.
Yeah, so, I owe a lot of that study of how to do it to Adam Hughes. Adam started doing these stuff in the late 90s, where he was really taking his own strong sense of black, still putting it in his original pieces, but selectively knocking out sections. So in the end, sometimes he only just had the outline of the figure in black. Everything else in the middle was knocked out of this really painterly style. And I really started paying attention to that, saying, how do I selectively incorporate that? Because, I mean, it's not my own piece, so I can't really do as much black line obliteration as Adam was doing, because that's his own. If he wants to knock out the things that he spent hours drawing ahead of time, that's his own call. But I'm accelerating other people's things, so I'm not really looking to knock out some stuff. Some pencilers, they're like, hey, do whatever you need to do to make the piece look good. Other ones are like, no, I want my line art front and center. Please don't knock out my line art at all.
And speaking of that, Color with Kurt says the less experience someone has, the more likely they are to be a problem. That's been my experience anyway. And I mean, you were talking about that. Some of the first stuff you did, you would get attached to a color and you just could not let it go. I think when you're a younger artist, it's harder to step back.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the first time getting your stuff colored by somebody else, you really are like, my baby's in this. This is the first drawing I ever did. This is the first, And so there are generally a lot of notes, but it's because we've been doing this a long time that we understand that. We're like, okay, this is your first piece. Yeah, fine. Give me your 40 pages of notes and I'll tell you which ones work and which ones don't and why I can do it and why I can't. And once we do this a long time, we're like, I've gotten some notes back from Arthur. I'm like, are you okay with this change? And he's like, I got 40 years of art behind me and seen lots of pieces colored. It's fine. It's some things you're flexible about, and there's some things that will always still bug you. So then you just bring it up and you fix it. It's what keeps us all interested in young. So now I'm going back in and I'm refining that secondary light source. Now that I have the full structure of her body done, I'm going to come back in there and I'm going to really tighten up that light source to what the anatomy would be. The color is still that base yellow. I'm going to refine that in a second. You're going to see that, but I'm like, okay, bring a little bit into that rib cage. Fix that area that I kind of didn't understand when I first looked at it. I was like, what is Dave drawing at the bottom of her like rib cage? And then once I started laying the secondary light source in, I was like, I get that. I know what that is. But fixing up her face a little bit, bringing in the structure that comes with the secondary light source. So I'll get all this refined, and then I'll come in and I'll color adjust that afterwards. So we'll answer some more questions while we just let this run, because this is
the Three Eyebrows has a $25 super chat. Thank you so much. And he says, you mentioned being informed and evolving, also based on what the general audience says. How do you gather their feedback? Thanks.
I gather that from the internet has been wonderful for that, because people will offer all kinds of opinions, whether or not you want them. But
Yeah.
how much feedback I get on a cover, if there's a lot of, ooh, that's really great, or, you know, those, or sometimes there's specific criticism, or it's like, I hate his colors, the pinky finger is weird. Those things definitely will inform you if there's a specific critique. But often, how many comments we get, we also look at, because we're a publisher, we can look at sales figures. You know, if this one's selling really well, we're like, okay, I got to remember that combo. But a lot of it's art discourse. It's just, especially at conventions when we all get together, or sometimes it's on the phone, texting, whatever. You know, we're not in a studio setup, so we don't get to talk to each other about artsy fartsy stuff as much as we did before. Eric and Dave do it on a semi-regular basis. But that's exactly how it happens, is one guy starts talking about his process, things that he learned. The other person comes in and says, hey, you know, this is what I figured out, or have you checked out this other artist? This is exactly how the dialogue all makes us better. This is exactly how we learn. It's, you know, passing around photos, but that's why social media has been fantastic for the development of young up and coming artists, is because someone was mentioning before, it's like, I would have killed to see this when I was a kid. Absolutely. You know, Dave knows how hard it was for us to get original copies of inked or even penciled stuff to study when we were learning.
I remember having copies of copies of copies. It's all just mud, but you can kind of see it. And,
we'd have FedEx boxes of stuff we copied at the office, but getting the stuff before we had the office, when we were like 17 and trying to figure it out, dude, it's so difficult, because you're parsing it from a tiny comic book image, not understanding with the level of detail that you can put in with a full size 11 by 17 image. So
Color with Kurt has another question. Let me just ask this quickly. And thank you so much, Color with Kurt. He says, hi, guys. For Peter, how has your technical workflow evolved over the years? And does your workflow change much from project to project?
I'm not sure my technical workflow has improved. I think it's just gotten streamlined. I've gotten rid of the detritus. I know what my setup is. I know that, you know, like I have these channels on here called Temp and Temp 2. I know that I need about 2 channels. I don't need, in the old days, we used to save lots and lots of different selection layers and selection channels. Now I know that I need a couple of temp channels, you know, one for the left side of her body, one for the stuff that crosses over. And then once I'm done with the skin, I'm moving on to another area, because I have flats that I can come back to and use a selection if someone has a more complicated change for a section. So these kind of things have sort of just evolved. I realized 2 temp channels is what I need. So that's a practical process. Other than that, like just doing the wings is actually a good example of a practical process. Back when I was inventing Grace's wings and how I'm going to do it, there was some stylistic things that we played around with. In the end, it's purple with some fastly brushed in magenta coming up on the bottom as if it was a glow, and then 2 tones of blue sitting on top of it. So if the scene requires it, which it will, and this one, because I have a secondary light source coming in, I will come and brush that in. But for the most part, that's the way I do her wings. You know, and regardless of adjusting for light source, because I can always do that afterwards, it's just fast. So practical process stuff, just get rid of the complicated things and make them simple, and then spend your time on the artistry part, because that's the stuff that's exciting and fun mentally anyway. So
I noticed you have a yellow background, and she has cooler skin, so it's purple basically. It's you know, pink purple. So is that planned right from the beginning, or would you color her more warm if you had a cooler, or like a different? If you had a purple background, would you color her more yellowish?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because some of it's instinct, and some of it's, you know, just learned behavior. A purple base to the skin tone rather than a tanner, more orange one, is generally quote unquote prettier. It kind of gives you this softer pastel-y glow. So that's what I, you know, when I'm doing something that I know that is intended to be gorgeous, my base ends up being that. If it's going to be edgier, you know, like some of the Wolverine pieces and things like that we've done, the skin tone is maybe greener, maybe grayer, maybe, you know, it's rougher looking. It's different. It's not so like, think lavenders. Okay, so here now I'm not using the temp channels for my skin. I'm now using it for the golds. So you'll see me click on it and select things as we talk, but I'll just showing you the different. So there's two. Basically, I've got two selections for the gold, which I end up not using at all. I kind of just turned it into one color and just went for it. Yeah, so the structure here was basically like, I know I wanted something that's going to end up being yellow in the areas that are mostly around her skin. I knew that was probably going to be my final top color. So yeah, there was a little bit more purple thought to the skin tone, so to make there a level contrast on the base, you know, on the shadow layer. So
the Color with Kurt says you seem to also maintain a lot of easy editability with layers and whatnot, and very much like me.
Yes, Kurt, you know, this is just about having editors. A lot of this is about production, knowing that we have to go back and make changes. So it's like, hey, we're not sure if this is going to work out. We'll make a layer. That way, if somebody makes me do a change, I can just turn the layer off or do something else with it.
Right. If it's a painting on paper, it's basically, you know,
yeah,
off of something time. Forget it.
If this is just a piece that I'm doing for myself, sometimes I've got a lot of layers because I'm experimenting. Sometimes I just doing it because I'm doing it. So I don't have any changes. This is a lot of the layer construction is simply because we're part of a chain of process that, you know, requires changes. So we're setting ourselves up to be flexible for that.
Extreme maybe asks, does anyone color traditionally anymore, or is Photoshop the standard?
Photoshop is the general standard. There are becoming more artistic versions. I know there's people who color, maybe Manga Studio is not the right word, but I know that you can do it in Procreate, and there's a lot of painting programs. And as far as when you're doing like Andy Park and these other guys who are doing things for movies, there's ways to do this artistry that are not Photoshop, that are other programs. But for the most part, accessibly, this is the standard. Photoshop has become the thing. And actually, Adobe didn't know for years that we were even using it for this. A couple of the programmers did, but Adobe was like, wait a minute, what? It was supposed to be for photo editing, and they're using it for art, like painting? There are people who do color. Lynn Varney still colors for, you know, like when she was doing Frank Miller stuff, it's painted over the top. You know, I think when The Dark Knight rides again or comes back the third time, whatever, they should switch to digital. But like Electra Assassin, she painted. And there's Bill Sienkiewicz still paints. I mean, there were a lot of fantastic color guys out there who just, you know, still painting. Dave's a painter. Well, Dave a fantastic colorist.
It seems like now if something's done traditionally, it's generally speaking more of a painting, and it's all the same artist. It's very rare for somebody to do colors over somebody else's work traditionally. I don't see that.
And even like Scott Campbell, he has other people coloring his stuff, but he can color his own, and he'll still paint. His medium is generally markers and less watercolor or, you know, or brushy stuff, but it's markers. And it's still the same kind of, this theories all still apply. You're building color in layer on top of each other. There are washes. You're doing highlights, shadows. You're still different stuff, but same thing. Arthur Adams has done full painting stuff to give me notes when we were doing Hulk. He wanted the Wendigos to look a certain way, so he painted it and then sent it to me and said, "This is what I want the Wendigos to look like." I was like,
wow.
This is the most awesome thing ever. Just shows the range of, you know, certain artists who not everybody gets to see because of the time production involved in us. You know, you get stuck in a role, pencil or ink or colors, because this is what comic production requires of all of us.
Yeah. Well, and you do absolutely get stuck in a role. You do get stuck in a role. I love painting. I'm not known for it. I don't know that I ever really will be. I spend most of my time doing, you know, and I love doing black and white work, but it's difficult when you build up a name doing one thing to just go out there and start doing something different.
Yeah, I mean, I always wondered about, like, you know, the rock guys singing, you know, Rolling Stones singing their songs for 60 years, the same songs. But I remember in the, you know, what you were going through in the late 90s, where you were like, you may not conquered all the frontiers of black and white, but generally kind of hit a spot where you're like comfortable with your stuff, weren't learning in big jumps anymore, and you're like, I need a new field to cover. And that's when you first started working with the painting. And it was something you needed to get into, but it informed how you handle black and white. It changed that as well, you know, because one did the other. How your painting style developed had a lot to do with your sense of black that you developed, but I think it changed some of the structure of the way you did blacks after that, because you were now able to, you could complete the sentence in creating a form. In other words, you're doing the full tonality of it, tint, hue, value, the whole thing.
Well, it's
when you extrapolate backwards and you're just dealing with straight black and white rendering of a value, you know, it made things a little bit different.
I found the big difference for me is I learned rendering, all the cross hatching, kind of in the image style, and it really is like an art form unto itself. It's its own thing, and I wasn't thinking of it as being a tonal shift from black to white, as much as after I started trying a little bit of painting, it really made it much more clear that, you know, I can use it to darken areas, lighten areas. I knew this, but not in the kind of complete way.
Yeah, because I mean,
a
lot of people's art education includes a little bit of Jim Lee. Jim's structure of how he does his cross hatching and his liner has so informed so many facets of the industry. But part of that is because Jim is such a complete artist. He can paint as fantastically as he wants and do several different lighting styles because he understands all of that. But all of that knowledge then informs his individual areas of art that he chooses to just highlight and go for it. Basically, the more well-rounded artist you are, the better artist it makes you, which just sounds kind of obvious, but I guess needs to be said.
Tagamo Modelworks is here. Good to see you, Tagamo. He has a $10 super chat. He says, darn, I'm late. Forgot what day it was. Just wanted to thank all three of you for taking time out to show a different process of doing comic art. Thank you so much, Peter.
No, you're more than welcome. This is a lot of fun. I mean, like I said, Dave and I talked about doing this last year, and it's, you know, it took us a while to get here, but it's definitely worth the time. And I don't say this as much as I did back in the day. I used to do some wizard schools and things like that, but they were just an hour. And by the time most people got settled down for the panel and, you know, we start talking, then 45 minutes later, somebody's throwing up, well, you got 5 minutes left sign, and then you're out. I mean, it's not time to go in depth, and you're not really talking about a lot of stuff, because for the most part, people's questions are, how do I set up layers? How do I set up things? Like, okay, you know, some people wanted advanced level discussions and other people just needed simple help. So this is a good kind of thing, because we can cover either in future sessions, or maybe I'll start my own competing YouTube channel and I'll fight you, Dave, for audience. I'll have 3, you'll have 5,000, and we'll just duke it out. But, you know, people will want different levels of information. So I think this is, you know, it's fantastic. And also, it's a good thing to stylistically talk to a lot of other colorists about how they approach things, because their level of thinking and approach to it is some of it's similar, but a lot of it's different. And how that informs their final project is, you know, really different. I know there's several guys that I know and talk to that there's a real base color theme to how they approach everything. You know, that they want everything to have sort of the same base color in an oil painting process, how you kind of lay down a sepia layer over everything. Or I guess in Dave, you guys do that with acrylics. I was watching you guys work. You know, you're laying down blacks or sepias in the same, you know, level. And guys who color pages, same way. You know, they've got one base tone that they're laying, and they're just laying midtones and highlights on top of that purple or brown or whatever they set down ahead of time.
Russ Klein asks, does creating Fresnel effects feel easier with Photoshop than when you are working traditionally?
Oh, yeah.
What did we say? Fresnel effects?
Yeah.
The rim line on her left side of her body, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, traditionally, if you do that, you're locked in for the most part.
Yeah, no, that is true. Yeah, you can't do that on a different layer.
If you smudge that over on a rib cage a little more, yeah, you're stuck. See, like right here, I can be like, I'm not exactly sure what color I have. So that's why I kind of left it a neutral thing, because I had to make a decision. So now I can color adjust it. Do that on a painting. I read, bad idea. I can't cover that up with teal. You're screwed.
Color with Kurt's definitely kind of trying to twist your arm there, Peter, to get a YouTube channel going.
Well, Kurt, why don't you're a working colorist. You go be on YouTube. I'm shy. Oh, I'm like a wallflower. I don't like talking about myself, even though I've been doing it for 2.5 hours straight. I guess maybe an hour and a half. So I'm not that bad.
Hour and a half, yeah, I know. No time.
Well, this whole piece is absolutely transformed, and it's just I've been leaning forward in my chair and just taking it all in. It's just such a joy to see this process before your eyes like this.
My uncle once told me when I was a kid, was like, we have to do. I was doing something, and he was like, "Just remember, this is for the family. It's not the Peter show."
Now, Peter, I don't know what this is. Evil One has a $2 super chat. Thank you so much. And he says, "Hey, have you ever colored with the old Ben Day dots? Do you know what that is?"
Ben Day dots?
Yeah.
There's a spelling on this.
I think he's talking about that dot pattern.
Yeah, from anime half-toning.
Yeah, half-tone, yeah.
You know, I think in high school I might have had a cut sheet of that. I have definitely used it as an acknowledged effect because, you know, here and there, not a lot. And it's not something that I stylistically throw into most of my things, but acknowledging that, and Kirby Crackle, things like that, you know, when you have to do certain types of pieces that harken back to those eras, you know, I definitely, I'm aware of it, and it comes into play.
Screen tone, I think that's what it's called. Screen tone.
Screen tone,
okay.
Yeah.
Kurt just extended an invitation to come in and talk on his channel. So
okay, Kurt. We'll figure out how to get emails, or it's just psteigerwaldart@gmail.com.
There you go.
Now I'll get lots of spam and Russian hackers, but you know, okay, so now we're just doing final adjustments. Grace has certain ring patterns, so there was a brush that you saw me jump into to get that. It's called Dragonfly Wings. It's just something I made back in 2003 when we were inventing stuff. And now just like her hair, adjust to a base color that I think works, which was the green, and then throw in some rubies and some blues as I see fit. Some of this is playing, so you'll see me wiping over one color with another color. And then now that it's all done, now I just stop, and the last thing that I'm doing, so as I'm brushing this in, I'm starting to think about what I'm going to do for her loincloth, because I haven't made a decision on it yet. In the initial brain fart, it was going to be, not brain fart, but sorry, brainstorm. Brain fart and brainstorm. But in the original brainstorm, it was going to be purple. But I'm like, as I did more of this, and the purple worked so well and so strong on the bottom, I don't want that, because I want that to stay in the background where it's beefy and perfect and beautiful. So I kind of decided ultimately, I was like, okay, well, the thigh pieces worked well as a teal, so let's bring that in. But it needs to be, I know value-wise, it needs to be light, because we're moving transition to the dark in the background. So we're going to Caravaggio, you know, contrast lights and darks. We're going to put the light stuff on the bottom. So I don't want to fight necessarily Dave's lighting, but that's what I have the yellow cast in the top left or the top middle for. But I want it to be lighter than the background. So this is where I start just refining that.
Yeah, you can really see just in a minute, it really kind of took shape. Mm-hmm. And it's some rendering from here, but it already just reads beautifully.
Yeah, because I wanted to make sure I was like, okay, that was my idea. That was my plan. It worked. And so now I'm like, okay, but it's stupid to not have shadow down there because of the way that we've lit everything else. So I'm going to take that light blue out, and I'm going to bring in this darker green so that it works better. But using that yellow shaft of light from the middle, I'm like, okay, well, all I have to do is color the fields that are facing that light, and that pops that forward from the background. And, you know, this is basic lighting 101 stuff. You know, stuff facing a light source is one color, stuff facing away from it is called shadow.
Yeah, you know, some of the hardest stuff is the quickest and most simple to learn, but to master it like this is a whole different thing.
It's called years of practice and, you know, getting to work with fine people.
I can't believe the dimension that you managed to get out of her hip, that big plate there. And it happened so fast. It's really amazing. It looks beautiful. I think that's my favorite thing on the whole thing. It's always something stupid like that for me, you know.
It's always with me too. You find these tiny little spots that you love so much, and everybody's like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Right there, underneath her wing, that tiny little corner. That's the best part." No, but yeah, that one was it's a conscious decision not to make it a smooth render because you kind of had a little bit of break in your lines. So I'm like, oh, kind of do it like it's corduroy or something where there's a little bit of a texture to the top of, that straight smooth renders. It's just like I dotted it a little bit as I did it to build up some interest. And so this just as I'm doing this, it developed. I'm like, I needed something satiny, so I just took my time rendering it. I was getting near the end of the piece, end of the night, so I indulged a bit more. This is one of the situations where I could do lasso, draw, and fill because we're looking for like a chromey kind of effect where you got, a bright edge right up against a hard surface. So you would create a lasso and then just render right along the edge. But I was able to brush it in with the pencil tool, which is what I had with me. So it was kind of fun at this point. Sometimes it's just art therapy, just noodling.
Yep. RC Designs asks if, for those on a budget, do you recommend Affinity Photo or find an earlier version of Photoshop? I don't know if that's cheaper to find an earlier version, but.
Yeah, because often earlier versions are not compatible. Like for me to continue using this version of Photoshop, I'm still on Mac OS Sierra. Like I haven't updated to the latest version because at some point I will have to, and I'll just get all, un-semi-Luddite that I am, just move into the proper decade/millennium.
A bad month having to make the transition, and then it'll be.
Yeah, because none of my programs will work. All the settings will be wrong, and I'll just, But it's on a budget. It's honestly, it's finding what you want. What is?
Clip Studio is a pretty good option, I think. I don't know how much it costs now. Probably a couple of $100, but
okay.
It's pretty powerful for the price, and it's becoming very competitive as well. So
yeah. So I have to say, Peter, it's a shame that the colors on this are beautiful. They're coming out incredible. For it to just be, here and that's the end of it. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, sorry. No, actually, the good thing is, thanks for bringing that up, Dave. It is not the end of it. You can actually own this, not the original, or some one person, a lucky person out there will get to own the original. But it will be a cover in our SoulFire the Core Kickstarter campaign. Oh, here's where I just goof off and try some other things in case the teal idea was wrong, which it wasn't. But it will be a cover on one of the books. So you can pledge for that tier and get your own copy of it. Well, that's basically it. It should go live any second. We'll be able to purchase. So great. If you haven't pledged, if you've pledged, you can do it as an add-on. If you haven't pledged yet, go ahead and do it new. And also, this is a good time to bring up. Frank wanted me to know that there's people who've been asking about how do they get me to color their stuff, because we've got a company to run and things like that. I'm coloring either Aspen stuff or stuff for Marvel DC clients, things like that. So I don't generally take on commissions for computer coloring. I will do it for. Oh, this is where I fixed Dave's eyeball because the pupil was a little crooked.
It was. You know what? I did it fast.
No, it's fine. It happens. And plus, when you drew it, it was like this. Where's my camera? It's like this big, and I can zoom in and make it gigantic and fix it perfectly. Because sometimes I'm fixing things line art wise. It's like a pixel per thing. But on our Kickstarter campaign, you can actually hire me out as a colorist. You can submit your own artwork, get your own piece colored up. I think there's 5 slots left. And we've had a lot of fans come in and be like, I've always wanted you to color something. Well, this is the way to get it done, because generally, as a rule, I don't take commissions like this, computer coloring at conventions, because the computer power is saved for things that we need to get done for publishing reasons. So I don't really use it for commissions, because if I'm not doing publishing coloring work, I'm like Dave, when you want to just have sketch days off that you're like not confined to anything. I'm drawing on a piece of paper, or I'm painting stuff, or I'm doing, you want to do something that's different than your normal regular activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've had quite a few times where I've tried to get you to do something, Peter, and you just have not been able to do it. This is a problem when you work with people that are the best.
Nobody
and
has time.
them too. And so, yeah, having the chance to have you color something, I think it's a great opportunity. And you have an iconic style, and a style that's been developed since the beginning of this kind of work. You know, since way back in the day when color guides used to still be done on paper. And I've said this many times on the channel, but I used to go into the color room, and if you moved a picture, the whole picture would disappear, and then it would slowly redraw from checkers. And you basically walk away and get coffee just to wait for the picture to move.
Yeah. Oh no, I remember there was a double page spread that we had to do, that it was something that was at a high res, because it was larger than a normal page size res, and we had to do something for it. And it was either Richard or Ashby who set up, maybe it was Steve. Basically what it was this high res double page spread. We were at the base starting point. He dropped a grad so that we could start visualizing where the background would be. And it was taking so long. We went to lunch and came back because the computers were so slow. The entire computing power in that original Top Cow office and how fast those computers were is like in my laptop now. Like, there's more terabytes of drive space. There's more processing power. It's just
on your phone.
On the phone, yeah. I mean, there was one day when we had to put out a book, and I locked the office door so nobody would come in there, and I was rolling back and forth between 7 different machines prepping pages, because that's just how long stuff took. But I mean, like I said, we developed a lot of these techniques in more manual times, so you could say that forced us into a different logic. But at the end of the day, like we've discussed, the logic is straight regular painting skills. The guys who came out of that studio, at least, there's lots of different people who come into coloring and other bits of comic art over the years. But this is the last fun part where I stick on my signature, and it takes me like 7 tries to get the right color. So maybe my color skills aren't that good because I can't even do my own name. But these guys all came in as accomplished painters, and really great art school resumes, and look at it, and it was just a matter of learning how to use the computer, which is just a new tool. People these days go the other direction. It's more start digital first and then realize, oh wait, there's paper.
Yes.
But it's all just this is nothing more than a big fancy $4,000 paintbrush.
It's really I think it's finished because you signed it. I cannot believe how nicely
it signed it. Change your color and put the sparkly things on, and now I'm just scooting around so you guys can all see.
And the final layer of just some sparkles in the hair and on the hands and in some different spots only really took a minute, but the difference that it made to the final picture.
Let me put that back up on the screen because
that's beautiful. It's been an absolute masterclass.
All right, well, maybe
JDSCT says definitely need to do this again. The knowledge, the stories, great stuff. Lance Boria says simply stunning. JD Scott says, man, unbelievable. And I saw earlier, Dark Era New Vegas said that a phone now is more powerful than the computers that landed people on the moon, which I think is true.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's not that I'd want to take my my iTunes and see if I can get to the moon, but yes, I think the computing power is probably true. No, I mean, this has been an enjoyment for me, not only to talk to all of you guys out there who have questions and need to learn from our experiences, but just to talk with Dave and Eric. I mean, this is, we don't get to talk artsy as much as you want to sometimes.
Yeah, we really don't. And then, we get together and we just haven't seen each other for a while, and we're not talking about process. We're just talking, about life. So it's nice to get a chance to do this. Arachnon 47.
You creating all this has been genius, Dave, because not only you get to talk about process, but you get to teach people. What I've liked, and I know we'll get to the question in a second, but I do have to say this, because what I've liked about watching your Monday night draws and your sessions where you teach people stuff is, for people who don't understand, it's all practical knowledge. I mean, I know you may have had some art courses down through the years, probably like us, high school art classes, things like that, generic stuff, but you learned things through your own observations and deep dives into how it's done. So when you tell them how to do stuff, it's from an understanding, not just from, well, this is how my art teacher taught it to me, so this is why I'm doing it. You're doing it because this is the way that you came up with that best understands for you. And that practical knowledge just takes the art lessons that you've been teaching everybody else to something that's I haven't seen. I mean, some of the shortcuts you show, some of the other things, it's fantastic.
Well,
so
thank
I do
you
have to say that you're an excellent teacer.
Thank you. I love doing it. It's really gratifying putting it together. There are times it's tough. I just a couple days ago I filmed a whole video on introduction to perspective.
Uh-huh.
Did I say that right? Introduction to perspective, and I scrapped it. I had to start again. It was garbage. And it's something that I understand, but I understand it too much intuitively. Like you forget how you learned. Anyway, yeah, that took a little bit of work. But
that's one of the things that I haven't broken down yet because I ended up. This is where when I try to teach, I do fail because there's a lot of stuff where it's like, I do it because it looked good, and then I stop. Maybe I pushed a little farther to make sure that was where I should have stopped, but
yeah,
it's so much judgment things. I haven't necessarily analytically decided this is how I do it, even though I do have a lot of analytical frame of mind. I should be better at it, but that's you're doing it for yourself. You don't always analyze your own thing and being like, "Why do I do this?" You just
and you go through so much theory and you put that to practice, and then it really just becomes second nature. So it's like explaining to somebody how you walk. It's not easy to do. Rackanon 47 has a $10 super chat. Thank you so much. He says, "Hey David, do you have any pointers for drawing cloak type capes that drape in front of the character? Example: Spawn, Batman, Damian Wade, Robin." Now I will tell you that I've got introduction to perspectives coming up next, and I'm going to be doing folds and clothing and hair next. Those are the next two videos. I'm not sure what order, but it is coming up very, very soon. Those two. So stay tuned, and thank you so much.
No, that's a good class to do because that is one of the weakest things in most comic artists, especially or beginning comic artists' repertoires, because we're so used to drawing what is essentially a naked human form with lines on it. The spandex stuff, and everybody can do pads and guns and things like that. But getting realistic cop hats or suits so that it looks like somebody lived in it and it's not just a square box with some lines for wrinkles. That's a really difficult skill. It's something that I worked hard on, but also because I saw how you struggled at it, and I'm like, not struggled at it, but how you saw like the deficient areas, and then you were like, you know what, I'm going to make this look better. And I'm like, this is your approach to art has always been very similar to mine, where it's like, okay, we're analytical and we're mean to ourselves. We're like, we got flaws. How do we fix those flaws? And then we're looking all around to find solutions for it. It's a tough place to be to have as your teacher because it's kind of mean where it's like, figure it out. But this is what we do. I mean, but it's how you get better.
It is. It's the only way, but it's a tough go. All right. So I want to say once again, please check out SoulFire, the core, the computer on Kickstarter. There's a link in the top of the chat and in the description of the video. It's a phenomenal book. It's a beautiful book. You can actually see a pretty good, substantial preview of it at the Kickstarter link, and really beautifully drawn. And this cover will be available. I think I don't know if it's up
live now.
Is okay. So you can get this cover as part of your
pledge to support. Yeah, backing of it. Backing is the word. Backing.
Right. I need somebody to finish my sentences. I can't do it. It's actually
we've been talking for 2 hours now. We're gonna have to get a little tongue tied, so it's time for everybody to take a little, take a break, decompress a bit. But this has been fantastic, Eric. This has been a total pleasure. Watching you guys paint, how you guys are different stylistically is, how you approach different things and the same, there's the same problem. You guys have two different solutions. It's always fun to watch.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this has been absolutely amazing to watch and learn a ton. Can't wait to try and put some of this into practice. So. Yeah, other than your Instagram, Peter, is there anywhere else where you'd like people to follow you and check out more of your stuff?
I have a Facebook that I rarely check, like never. But there's our Aspen Comics Facebook pages and Instagram, and I think we'll be developing on all the new social medias as the new social medias come out. We've got exciting stuff coming up, so definitely check it out there. I tend to be a work hermit, shut the door and don't do my own stuff. I need to post more, but I'm working on that. I will try to be better. My book that never comes out is called Zoo Hunters. I'm supposed to work on that, and someday I'll get that done. But right now, it's SoulFire the core. Forget anything else I said. SoulFire the core. SoulFire the core. That's basically it. When conventions start up again, I'm sure we'll be there. I think Dave, you just did one, right?
Yeah, in Canada. So
again, yeah.
Coming up soon, I'll be going back to the States. Looking forward to it. I miss New York, miss LA, and the South, Texas. So it'll be nice to get back down there.
Yeah, I just traveled back home for some family stuff back to Hawaii, and it's, as travel starts, it starts to feel a little bit more normal as as things start getting back up to pace.
Yeah.
So looking forward to all traveling and seeing you guys again. And then, like I said, like everybody's talked about, I think Dave will work on maybe doing this again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be great. I learned a lot. I have to admit, I'm going to end up having to watch this a couple of times because so much of it I understood when you were painting. And this part here, I'm watching you put some of the clouds in. I understand a lot of this, but a lot of the channel mixing is a little difficult for me. So I'm really
because that gets technical, and I get that part. This is just you recognize this part because this is just all composition. And,
right. So yeah,
some of this stuff looks like I'm just sticking things on layers, but I'm really making notes in my own brain about what I want to do with this. I'm like, okay, how is this going to function later on? And that gets kind of advanced, and that's something that maybe if we do this as a more an often event, this is like I could explain more about why I do it and how I do it and how I develop the process of what I'm storing in my brain compositionally. But I think you've got some composition videos, and we'll talk about that at some other time.
All right.
That's the whole subject itself.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for coming on. And thank you to all of you for coming and watching. Hopefully this was entertaining. It was entertaining, I'm sure. And hopefully for colorists out there that are looking to break in, you learned a lot here. And also, thank you to Eric for co-moderating with me. And am I forgetting anything, Eric?
Nope.
I think that's about it. Yeah.
Say hi to Frank for me.
I will do that. He's listening in right now, so I think he just did.
All right. So thank you everyone so much. I hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you Monday night for Monday Night Draw with Meredith and Dave. And in the meantime, have a great weekend. Good night.
Say hi to Meredith for me, although she's probably reading this, so I just probably did the same thing. I said hi to her.
No. She's in bed. I'll say hi.
Anyways, you guys have a good night. Yeah, it's late over there, so get some rest. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you again soon.
All right. Good night, everybody.